There is a potato growing wild across eastern North America right now that tastes better than anything you will ever find in a grocery store. And almost no one knows it exists. Native American children once called it underground candy. Gold rush miners said it saved their lives. European settlers ate it so obsessively that the most famous forager in history joked about withdrawal symptoms when it ran out. And yet today, it has vanished from our food system completely. You will not find it in stores. You will not see it at farmers markets. You will not find it in seed catalogs. And the reason has nothing to do with taste, nutrition, or yield. It has everything to do with control. What you're about to hear is not just a forgotten food story. It is a story about how an entire continent abandoned a superior crop because it refused to be domesticated. This is a story of spring beauty, Claytonia Virginica, the fairy potato that fed civilizations for over 10,000 years, the nutritional powerhouse that outperformed the Irish potato, and the feast still growing silently beneath your feet. Welcome to Lost Nature Vault. In late March, just as winter finally loosens its grip, something strange begins to happen across the forests of eastern North America. Before the trees grow their leaves, before summer grasses steal the sunlight, the forest floor suddenly wakes up. Millions of tiny flowers push through the soil at the same time. Pale pink petals striped like fine brush strokes open only when the sun shines and close again as evening falls. For 2 or 3 short weeks, the woods are carpeted in color. Then just as suddenly, everything disappears. Most people think that is the whole story. A brief spring flower. Pretty, fragile, forgettable. But underground, hidden beneath 3 to 5 inches of soil, the real story has been waiting patiently for thousands of years. Small, smooth tubers sit buried like treasure. Some no bigger than marbles. Others nearly 2 inches wide. To modern eyes, they look insignificant. 2 ancient cultures. They were survival itself. Long before cornfields, before wheat, before industrial agriculture, spring beauty was the potato of North America. Archaeological and ethnobotanical records show that Algonquin peoples relied on these tubers as a staple food, cooking them exactly the way we cook potatoes today. The Iroquois prized them as a delicacy, boiling and roasting them, and giving them to children as sweets because of their naturally sweet chestnut-like flavor. For kids, digging them up was like finding candy hidden in the soil. In the Pacific Northwest, the Thompson people built entire food systems around similar wild tubers. They pit-baked them for preservation, seasoned them with native herbs, and stored them through the winter in lined earth pits, exactly the way modern farmers store potatoes today. This was not a marginal food. This was a foundation crop. Reliable, abundant, self-renewing. And unlike modern potatoes, it did not need plowing, fertilizer, irrigation, or pesticides. It simply grew for thousands of years. This system worked. Spring beauty thrived in forest soils, spreading freely, reseeding itself year after year. It required almost no effort beyond harvesting. Entire communities timed their movements around its bloom. Children learned to identify it before they could read. Elders passed down knowledge of where the largest patches grew and how to harvest without destroying future yields. This plant was woven into culture, memory, and survival. And then, in 1719, everything changed. That year, a ship arrived in New Hampshire, carrying tubers from Derry, Ireland. These potatoes had already traveled a long and strange journey. They originated in the Andes of South America, were taken by the Spanish to Europe, adopted heavily by the Irish, and finally shipped back across the Atlantic. But they arrived with something spring beauty never had: an empire behind them. Within decades, the Irish potato spread aggressively across colonial farms. It was planted in straight rows. It fit neatly into European agricultural thinking. It could be stored in cellars. It could be transported long distances. It could be standardized, measured, and controlled. By the mid-1800s, it had almost completely replaced native potatoes that indigenous peoples and early settlers had relied on for generations. And here is the part that should make you stop and think. We did not upgrade. We traded down. Spring beauty tubers are nutritionally superior to modern potatoes. By almost every meaningful metric, they are rich in vitamins A and C. They contain high levels of potassium, calcium, magnesium, and iron. En 1938, study by Yanofsky and Kingsbury found that Spring Beauty corms contained roughly double the amount of reducing sugars compared to non-reducing sugars, alongside significant starch content. That means faster energy, cleaner digestion, and far less cooking time. Raw, they crunch like radishes. Cooked, they become creamy, sweet, and nutty. Closer to roasted chestnuts than anything you would call a potato today. The Brooklyn Botanic Garden once described them as the definitive tater tot. U.L. Gibbons, the man who literally taught America how to forage, wrote that they were sweeter than standard potatoes and worked perfectly fried, mashed, boiled, or tossed into salads. He famously ate them twice a day for weeks and joked that his friend worried he would suffer withdrawal symptoms when the patch ran out. So why did we abandon a food that tasted better, grew freely, and delivered more nutrition? The official explanation sounds reasonable on the surface. Spring Beauty tubers are small. They grow deep. They cannot be harvested by machines. They do not store for months in warehouses like russet Burbanks. But this explanation collapses the moment you look closer. Spring Beauty grows in dense, stands so thick they carpet entire forest floors. Skilled foragers can collect double handfuls in under an hour during peak season. Indigenous communities harvested them sustainably for thousands of years without depletion. Children literally dug them up while playing. The issue was never productivity. The issue was compatibility. European agriculture is built on control. It demands uniformity, predictability, year-round availability, and centralized ownership. You cannot control a potato that disappears 3 weeks after spring begins. You cannot patent it. You cannot force farmers to buy new seed stock every year. You cannot monopolize something that reseeds itself freely in the wild. Spring Beauty refused to be tamed. The Irish potato did not. It fit the system perfectly. And once the system chose its winner, everything else was erased. By the mid-20th century, potato agriculture underwent another transformation. The rise of the French fry industry fundamentally reshaped what potatoes were bred for. In the 1950s and 1960s, agricultural research shifted from serving farmers to serving processes. Scientists began using engineering language instead of biological language. Potatoes were no longer bred for flavor, nutrition, or resilience. They were bred for length, uniformity, and oil absorption. The goal was not food. The goal was efficiency, and in that world, Spring Beauty had no place. This erasure was not unique. Across North America, indigenous crops like goosefoot, marsh elder, and groundnut were systematically replaced by corn, wheat, and soy, not because they were better foods, but because they were easier to commoditize. They could be scaled. They could be taxed. They could be controlled. Spring Beauty represented something dangerous to that system. Wild abundance. A food that belonged to no one and everyone at the same time. Here is where the story becomes uncomfortable. Today, governments and corporations spend billions of dollars trying to genetically engineer climate-resilient crops. Scientists are desperately attempting to force industrial potatoes to survive drought, disease, and soil collapse. Meanwhile, a perfectly adapted native potato continues to grow wild across half the continent without human intervention. Spring Beauty thrives in woodland soils. It survives freezing winters. It spreads naturally. Once established, it returns year after year. Its southwestern cousin, the four-corners potato, contains up to twice the protein, calcium, magnesium, and iron of organic red potatoes, and a single tuber can produce hundreds of offspring in just a few months. The solution has been under our feet the entire time. But here is the final twist. Indigenous communities who preserved this knowledge for millennia now fear reintroducing these crops. Lahel Balenqua, a Hopi archaeologist, explained that they view these plants as intellectual and cultural property. They understand what happens when corporations discover something valuable. Extraction follows. Patents follow. Control follows. They watched their food systems destroyed once already. They are not eager to let it happen again. Today, Spring Beauty exists in a strange limbo. It is labeled controversial to harvest due to conservation concerns, even though it grows abundantly in nearly every county of Illinois alone. It is sold occasionally as a wildflower, not as food. Foraging guides mention it as a curiosity. Seed catalogs ignore it completely. Most people walk through spring forests, admire the pink flowers, take photos, and never realize they are standing on a buried feast. The fairy potato has become a fairy tale, not because it could not feed us, but because it did not fit the system we built. Every April, the spring beauties bloom again. They still produce their tiny, delicious tubers. They still offer themselves freely. Most people just walk past them on their way to buy potatoes shipped from thousands of miles away. If this vault opens something for you, subscribe to Lost Nature Vault and hit the bell. Every like and every share helps preserve the knowledge they tried to bury. Some foods are too wild to farm, some flavors are too good to forget, and some treasures are still waiting right beneath your feet. The next vault opens soon.